Hey guys, happy Saturday. We're sitting here at Anastasia down here in Laguna Beach. You know, the housing market over the past couple of years has been super competitive and people have been fighting over this low inventory, and we really haven't had a chance to sit down, pull back, and really understand this whole process of buying a home. You know, not just Laguna Beach, but buying a home in general. And so I thought I'd break it down today and talk a little bit about what it takes today to buy a home. I think what it all comes down to is, where do you want to buy a home? How much money do you have? What is your budget? And what is the process that it takes? You know, you hear about all these all cash buyers and multiple offers that we've been experiencing in the past, several years. Now that the dust is starting to settle and we're starting to get back to much more of a normal pace, I thought I'd take the opportunity to break down what it takes to buy a home in Orange County, Laguna Beach, just real estate in general. And I think one of the most important factors, how can you pay for it? So I thought I'd bring in an expert today, somebody that we work with on a regular basis, a local resident here in Laguna Beach, Darren McClellan. Darren's always been available, always giving of his time, and always offers a good, clear perspective on the lending industry and the market in general. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks. Can't wait to have a great conversation. I'm excited, you guys.
What are you seeing in the lending market today? Not just here in Laguna, but specifically, what's driving the lending market most?
I mean, it's all about affordability right now. At the end of the day, interest rates and affordability is, should I be buying? Can I afford to buy? Is it a good time to buy? A lot of that today is tied to the cost of money.
2007, 2008, that whole period of time where we got in trouble, a lot of people got in trouble. Lending guidelines, restrictions, regulations tightened up and made that process a lot more, much more of a daunting process, it seems.
For sure.
What is that process today? How's that impacting the buyers today?
Lenders today require, in general, your ability to document the ability to repay the mortgage.
Okay.
So in years prior to that, you could basically fog a mirror and I could get you a home loan. If you had a pulse and had a decent credit score, it's pretty easy to qualify. Today, very, very different dynamic. Generally speaking, there's a couple different categories of lending that people in a coastal market like this, where prices are higher, and maybe even throughout Orange County, there's a couple different buckets of lending. It's kind of your full doc. You've got to be able to document your ability to repay, so it's credit, income, and assets. We're really going to scrutinize all that to determine if it meets eligibility guidelines. That would be considered a full doc loan. But you also have some options for self-employed borrowers, more like bank statement type loans, where we're documenting income in a different way. We're really looking at how much money is coming through your bank account, either business or personal, to derive a stream of income that would support the monthly mortgage payment. In general, lending standards tightened post 2008 debacle, right? The meltdown, and they haven't really changed.
Okay.
And we really 15, 16 years into lending standards that have basically stayed flat.
Okay.
Not a lot of new products, not a lot of additional options, not a lot of stated income type stuff.
I want to buy a house in Laguna Beach. The lowest price home in Laguna Beach today is $1.199, right? That's it. There's nothing under. There are a couple of mobile home units in Laguna Terrace Mobile Home Park that you can get. We'll go into that a little bit later. Somebody comes and says, hey, I want to buy a house. What's the first thing that you say to them? What is your first question?
We always start with what your goals are, right? So we want to understand, of course, their credit, income, and assets. We need to know that, but we're going to try to uncover what their goals are. Hey, what's your kind of both short-term and long-term plans?
Okay.
And does owning real estate kind of align with your plans? Oftentimes we'll ask them, what are you paying for rent? What is your future income expectations? So we can help them plan accordingly and make an actual good strategy. But we're really looking at those three things: credit, income, assets. We need to understand those things to determine what products are going to be available.
I come across situations where we've got beater homes, older homes that are beat up. People are just stretching just to get into the neighborhood. They put every penny they've got into buying that home, and they've got a couple $100,000 or $50,000 that they need to spend to fix that house up. What can somebody do in that case?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's hard right now. I mean, with the cost of money and the inventory challenges, it's not easy. I mean, to think it's easy, it's just not. That would just be a completely false statement. I would say, particularly when you're maybe a little bit what I'd call undercapitalized. You just don't quite have enough money to do all the things you want to do. The house, like you said, needs work. So generally what I would recommend in those situations is borrow as much as you can when you buy the house.
Yep.
just try to leverage up, what we call leveraging up, or like put the smallest amount of down payment you can and buy the house so that whatever extra money you have can be used to improve the property. Alternatively, there's some stuff like construction loans, and you can get home equity lines of credit, but those are harder because it really relies on you having some equity in the property, or the ability to kind of like expand the equity in the property through a remodel or construction project, but a little more complicated product and not super simple just to kind of jump into that.
There's a lot of entrepreneurial people out there right now, house flippers, fixer-uppers, people who take pride in doing this stuff and want to do that, but yet they don't have access to do the things that they need or that they project to need to be done on these houses that they want to buy to bring the value, and then be able to, sell it at a much higher price. And so are there products out there where somebody will partner with you, essentially share in some of that equity position, so that at the end of the day when they, maybe they partner in it? I've heard of products like that. Is that something that happens in today's market?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I would say kind of three areas that maybe are worth considering. One is the Dream for All program that just rolled out in California, or it's just coming out in the month of March. It should be released. They will provide up to 20% of the down payment. Okay. If you're a first-time home buyer and you're a first generation home buyer, so nobody above you actually owns real estate. Okay. That's the requirement. Whoa. And it's a lottery system. Not necessarily going to be like a very predictable product, but it's worth looking into. So that's through Cal HFA. The other program that's worth noting is like there is we fix and flip type financing. So it's really specifically for investors. So let's just say you found a great property and it was $1.2 million in that example you gave. And you could come up with a 20% down, but you didn't have the money to rehab the property. Right. Now, it's not intended for if you're going to occupy the property. This is like you're going to do a project. Right. But then you can finance, oftentimes, the total cost of the improvement. Okay. And they'll lend that money to you. The interest rates are going to be higher because it's private money, effectively. It's fix and flip, so those interest rates might be somewhere between 10 and 13%, depending on your experience level. But they'll lend you the money for the purchase and the improvements. Okay. And they're going to be basing their position based on the future value of the property. So the expectation that the value will be higher, they'll lend you kind of maybe 75% of that future value. And is their position in the sharing of the profit higher because of that? Yeah, so there are a few groups that might share. Most of these programs, you're just paying interest, so they're not actually participating. Okay. To take a step back, the Dream for All program, they do participate. They'll give you 20%, they take 25% of the future upside when you sell the property. Yep. In most of the fix and flip financing, they're not doing that. There's a few investors that might partner with you. Okay. It's kind of niche. Okay. Yeah, not super common. I've got a situation, actually 2 clients right now. They both have a lot of properties, they have a lot of stuff, but they don't have access to a bunch of cash to be able to respond to this competitive market. Yeah. 2 Ocean View properties that come on, people want. One of them, again, this 1199 up in Bluebird Canyon that everybody's fighting over. You got to be able to respond quickly. It's just it's a complicated space, and it's hard to understand it actually. Like, hey, why are these people have all this equity in the house, they have tons of assets, but why can't they get a home loan? Why can't they borrow money to buy that next property? Exactly. It's a common thing because, as we talked about at the beginning, lender standards really haven't opened up a lot of space for you to borrow freely against your equity in your home without the ability to either document your ability to repay, right? So you can prove that you can afford the monthly payment, or you maybe have enough liquidity, you have enough cash to do the down payment piece. So you can do some stuff called cross collateralization. Let's say you have one house, you have no mortgage on it, you want to buy the new house. How do you buy the new house? So you can do a bridge loan. Basically, the loan is against the new property and possibly against the old one as well. Okay. So the lender's protected because they have 2 properties, and maybe they'll give you enough money to buy the house because you have so much equity in the other house. Yeah. Now, in most bridge loans, you have to show that you can make the mortgage payment. Okay. There are some lenders that will do it basically in good faith because you have so much equity between the 2 properties. All of those assets that are tied up in those houses, you can use that sometimes to borrow the money. Okay. Let's say you have somebody doesn't have that properties. They want to buy a home in Laguna. They've been renting for 10, 15 years. Market's gone up. They feel priced out. What are you telling people in that market? You got to create a plan to begin with, right? I mean, it's very hard to suddenly say, hey, I want to buy a property. We generally like to create a plan, which is you got to identify how much money you're going to need to put down. How much money do I need to make to qualify? And then is my credit in good enough shape to be able to borrow money? generally that can take, that could take a couple months if you're lucky, but it might take years to kind of get the plan in place. And this is the hardest part about being in our business right now, is because you got to tell some people, no, you can't qualify. And we just want to say yes to everybody, but we just can't. So I would say for those people, save some money, try to get your income as high as possible, and eliminate unnecessary debt, credit card debt, any other unsecured loans that are high interest rate debt. Just get rid of all that stuff. That will put you in an optimal position to be able to borrow money. So
for example, I'll reference this one in Bluebird right now, 1199. I think it's listed actually at 11, and it's competitive, and so it was bid up quite a bit higher. But it was a pretty dilapidated property. People have been living there for a long time. But the home is pretty beat up. We also had one in a similar condition that we sold about 5 months ago. Beat up. Most people would not want to live in these places, but they see the value in buying a little beater in this neighborhood, and they're like, I want in. So we get in, they find a way to do it. As we go through this process, they're buying their first home, first-time buyers. We go through the appraisal. The appraisers come out and determine that the home isn't in habitable shape. There's electrical things that are faulty. There are drainage issues that they don't like. How do you circumvent that?
Yeah, so from a lending perspective, lenders are going to be concerned about what are considered health and safety issues.
Okay.
So something that would make the property uninhabitable.
Okay.
Doesn't have working bathroom, the kitchen doesn't work correctly, the roof is leaking, windows are broken, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
That's going to concern the lender, because how are you supposed to live there? And this is their collateral.
Yep.
This is how you secure the loan, is secured by the property.
Yep.
So in those cases, generally you can't do a traditional loan. That's where private money kicks in. So either like a fix and flip type loan, or just a private money loan where somebody's lending the money, secured by the house. They're going to give you time to fix up the property. Once the property is repaired, then you can go back in and put a traditional loan on it.
Okay. And those are people's dream houses here in Laguna. They're just begging to get in, and it's just a beater. Super cool. I mean, you can get into it. We did work around it. It worked itself out, and we rectified the conditions.
Yeah.
And then the lender, was okay with it. We didn't have to bring in another lender who would accept the conditions.
Yes, I mean, in an ideal situation, you take care of the repairs prior to the escrow closing, so you can still get a traditional loan on it that's much cheaper.
Okay. Renting versus buying. How do you look at that when you're talking to somebody in that situation?
Yeah, so I would say in many markets, as soon as prices get really high in a market, or they feel high, people have to make the decision of, should I rent or should I buy? And it's a tough one, right? Because especially when interest rates are so high, all of a sudden you look at the mortgage payment, taxes, insurance, everything, you're like, wow, that's going to cost me so much money. Why don't I just rent? It's way cheaper when interest rates are high. In high-end markets, it's probably a lot cheaper in the short run to rent. My advice for somebody that's renting, if they want to buy, is do some analysis. So you got to try to decide, hey, here's what I'm paying for rent, here's what my all-in payment, principal, interest, that's your mortgage interest and principal that's paid down every month, your taxes, insurance, what's that all look like? So what if it was like $6,000 to rent and $12,000 to buy? You're like, wow, that's a huge gap. I would never do that, right? Why would I spend an extra $6,000 to own? And in the short run, it's probably not a great idea if you're going to just get in and out of the house in 2 years. But what happens is, over time, the economics start getting better. Oftentimes you can refinance a loan, so your mortgage payment goes down. You start paying down some principal on the loan, so now you're building some equity in the house. And the market keeps expanding in terms of price, and so now you're really like, the property value is going up. So when you look at the return on your investment over time versus renting, after you get past the first couple of years, now all of a sudden it starts to really skew in favor of owning versus renting, because all those things start compounding. The value increases over time. The equity grows because of both appreciation and amortization. So when you add all that stuff up, as you know and I know, it's like, that's where you make real money versus, just saving some money in the short run by paying less in rent.
Yeah. Okay, last thing I kind of want to touch on here in Laguna, and I touched on it a little bit, is these mobile homes, Laguna Terrace Mobile Home Park. I get calls on this occasionally where somebody will say, hey, there's a home down in South Laguna for $399,000. Get me in there. Well, and that's true. They are available for $399,000. One right now is $299,000. There's one as high as $850,000 right now. Those are mobile homes. They are homes. People live in them. Families live in them. They're awesome. People like them. They're an alternative way of less expensive housing here in Laguna, but I think people are misunderstanding or misinterpreting what they actually are on paper when they see them at $299, to buy a property in Laguna. You're not actually owning the land. You actually, on top of the purchase price of the actual unit itself, you have to pay a monthly land lease fee, and those can range from anywhere from about $3,500 on up to, I think, $7,000, something like that is the price for those.
So that high.
Yeah, they're pretty high. So, have you financed any of those? Do you ever come across that?
Generally, so you can sometimes, depending on the term of the lease,
okay,
you got to really look at the lease. Normally, if the lease extends the period of the loan,
okay,
so if it's like a 30-year loan and it's a 35-year lease, then sometimes you can finance those properties.
Okay.
The challenge that happens when you're looking at a property like that, which is to your point, is like the price seems super attractive. I would say right now, because interest rates are high, maybe the economics make a little more sense. Mm-hmm. Maybe the lease plus whatever you're paying for the house, maybe it works out in the short run. When interest rates come back down, then it's less attractive because your mortgage payment is less on a house, and you don't have that fixed expense of the lease.
Of the land.
And those leases, I'm assuming, go up over time, right?
They do. Yeah. They do. They have escalations. I think they're 3% a year escalation clauses in those land leases.
So as opposed to like having a mortgage payment that never changes, if you get a 30-year loan, or you can refinance it lower, having that lease that keeps going up, that's a little bit scary. So I think you have to kind of weigh out those two things, right? Hey, do I want to pay this big lease, which isn't tax deductible, I'm assuming, it's not tax preferred in any way, and also it can rise versus fixed rate mortgage.
Sure, absolutely.
So, and if you're paying like $7,000 a month on a mortgage, you could probably borrow, you're borrowing probably $1 million on the loan versus, maybe you get a better house for the same amount. What do you think?
I think it comes down to a lot of lifestyle too, and what you want to do and where you are in that part of life and where your cash is important, and you got to really, with all this stuff, I think you really got to take that into account. Like, what's really important to you? Like, living this life for your kids for a period while your kids are doing this? Is it really saving for your future? Depends on what you're comfortable with and what you're trying to ultimately achieve. Because I think a lot of people would choose lifestyle over economic intelligence, you know what I mean, or decisions, because they want to live the life that they want to live. And so what does it take to buy a house in Laguna? What does it take to really do this thing? And I think people are, especially because it's gone so fast the past 5 years, people are lost in, how do you do this? What do we do? You hear about all this stuff of being priced out, no ability to buy a house. I mean, I'm more nervous about our kids. Where are our kids going to live? They're used to living this life. They got no ability to be able to afford this. I mean, I don't want my kids have all the potential in the world. I'm not undercutting their future, belief in them, but god dang, the competition to really survive and live in this environment, it's hard.
I think so. A couple of thoughts. I mean, one is there is some generational wealth transfer that happens. So sometimes, like, now that I've lived in a town like this for a long time, you're like, how do young families afford to get into the house, into this community? Like, who actually can afford to get here? Are there any new babies being born in this town? I don't know. You're like, but then you go over to the park and you're like, there's little kids over there. So I think part of it is generational wealth transfer. Clearly there's still a lot of money out there, and some of the money is coming in from other areas. Orange County is adopting a lot of people from Los Angeles, the Bay Area, and so you are seeing an influx of more money, and so they can afford potentially to, maybe they're putting, instead of 20% down, now they're putting 50% down and getting a much smaller loan. I would say that's pretty common right now. Is bigger down payments. Because rates are higher. If you're not in that situation, it's just tough. Where some of those people, I would argue, maybe you're better off buying an investment property somewhere else. Maybe you try to buy a duplex. There's some opportunities to house hack. Maybe you can add an ADU. Maybe you can do something else to get a little bit of extra income. To try to offset your mortgage payment. Convert the garage. There are things you can do. Maybe use it, create a studio in your place, just to get some other income to help you make the payments. We have a multifamily unit property coming on the market pretty soon. There's a buyer who has some interest in buying it. She swears she can buy it, right? It's 2 units. She's got about 15% down, right? For a 2-unit property. It's going to be listed at about $2,499.
What do you need for a down payment if you're buying if you're buying a single family house, condo, multifamily? Do that real quick.
Yep.
Down payment
Yep.
percentages, essentially.
Down payments vary depending on occupancy. So if you're buying a property as your primary residence, you can borrow the most amount of money. So 85, in some cases 90%.
Okay.
Especially if you're like a medical professional, you could borrow up to 90%. Once you get above 2 million, it generally drops down to about 80% of the purchase price.
Okay.
Assuming you're occupying the property. When you're buying an investment property, typically you're going to need 20-25% down for the investment property.
What if you're occupying a portion of the investment property? Does that matter?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
So you get treated like an owner-occupied property.
Okay, for the whole property?
You do, but
Okay.
sometimes 2-unit properties are going to have some price adjustments or loan-to-value restrictions. So
Okay.
it wouldn't be uncommon to have to put a little more money down for a 2-unit property.
Yeah.
Generally, you're going to maybe have to put a little more money down to buy a 2-unit.
Okay.
15% down on a 2-unit, $2 million is going to be tough, I think.
I agree, and I think that's the reality. Let me ask you just about the costs of it, because that's kind of a misunderstanding about lending costs, closing costs. What does that all mean?
Yeah, so whenever you buy a property, you have a couple of things you need to account for. You need to have your down payment funds.
Okay.
You typically need to have an initial deposit that's part of your down payment funds.
Okay.
Oftentimes, it's 3% of the purchase price.
Okay.
In California, 3% is pretty standard.
That's the earnest money deposit is what we hear about. Okay.
Yeah, and that's typically part of your down payment. And then you're going to have closing costs, which is the fees associated with closing on the property, transferring the title from seller to buyer, like all the costs that are kind of like confusing to most people. Like, what are all these costs?
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you like 4 or 5 of the biggest ones. So typically you're going to have loan fees. Those might be around $1,500, $1,600, $1,700. Generally, that's a pretty good safe bet.
Okay.
Then you're going to have the 2 big ones are going to be title insurance and escrow fees.
Okay.
Escrow fees tend to be around 2.5% of the purchase price.
Okay.
Both people pay escrow. So escrow is like a third-party intermediary. They're like Switzerland in the transaction. They process the paperwork. They ensure the contract is adhered to, and they collect money from both sides to handle all that work. And you have something called title insurance. Title insurance is to ensure that there's no liens, encumbrances, issues that would impact your ability to use the property that you weren't aware of. So they do a property search, a title search, all these things, and sometimes there's property line issues, and particularly in an area like Laguna Beach, there's a requirement for that to protect your interest in the property.
Yeah.
So that would be a big fee. So lender fees, escrow fees, title fees, and then there's going to be like some kind of, I call them like junk fees that are going to be like recording fees and county fees. And then the other one would be like prepaid expenses. So when you close on a house, you got to get an insurance policy, and you also have to prepay interest. Typically, you're going to, if you're buying a house with a home loan, you're going to pay up to maybe 15 days of interest, maybe more than that, on the new loan, and then you skip a payment in the first month.
Yep. So there's all those little fees that people don't think about.
So I always say like 1 to 1.5% of your purchase price in closing costs is a pretty safe number.
Yeah.
So just don't forget, like you got the down payment plus closing costs. You got to have all that in order to be able to close.
I've had a number of people have asking me, hey, we're going to wait for this market to fall. We're going to wait for things to come down. We're going to wait for rates to come down, prices to come down, whatever it is. What are you hearing and what you're doing? I'm sure you're hearing the same thing. I'm going to wait for rates to get back down to 3%. Is that happening anytime soon?
Rates at 3%, no, I don't see that at all. But I think unfortunately, we have a herd mentality that happens in society, in our culture, in our country. And so there is this, and no question that interest rates being elevated impacts affordability. It starts to make, it's hard to make sense of it because you're like, man, this is just way too much money. I can't afford it.
Yep.
Now, if you just flat out can't afford it, then you have no choice but to wait. If you're somebody that can afford to make today's mortgage payments at these interest rates, but you just simply are trying to time the market to wait till interest rates come down, I think that's a huge mistake. You really have to take, kind of a contrarian mindset, which is, if the herd is waiting for rates to come down, what do we think is going to happen from a demand perspective? Like, When everybody comes off the sidelines, what do we think is going to happen with the pressure on inventory that's already very low? How much demand is going to come in the market when rates get down? They say like 5 million more Americans can afford to buy when interest rates improve by 1%. Yeah. What does that mean? Well, if you're waiting for that, competition's just going to heat up, and likely you're going to have to pay more for the property. I already saw a bidding war last week. There was 56 offers on a property in Irvine for $700,000 condo, and it bid up to $840. So if you can find stuff right now that you actually like and want to live in, buy it at today's rates, refinance when rates come down. The Fed has already said, hey, we're going to adjust rates at some point this year. They're kind of committing to that. So you have a pretty strong possibility. So 84% of Americans believe that interest rates are going to get better, but they still think that right now is not a good time to buy because of affordability. So if everybody's waiting till rates come down, what's going to happen, right? Like, we're going to be in a terrible situation like we were during the pandemic, where there's too many buyers, not enough houses, prices really ran up quickly. In our market today, we have a big supply challenge. Orange County in particular, was the #1 market in the whole country in 2023 for appreciation. And the biggest driver for that is we don't have enough houses for the amount of people that want to live here.
And that is the one thing that I do want to say too, is just to touch on that point, because I think we have a lot of those buyers who say, yeah, we want to wait for the market to come down and come back. And that's the one thing definitively that I know after coming out of this COVID experience, is that this market may come up and down a little bit, but we've crossed a threshold in value here in coastal Orange County that I don't think we're ever going to go back behind again. You know what I mean? I feel like, honestly, the world has gotten smaller, and I've said this to a number of people. I mean, if you put all the top 10 factors of what you would consider important in deciding where you want to live, lifestyle, safety, entertainment, travel, education, healthcare, all that stuff, put those in a bucket and pick anywhere in the world where you want those top factors, I guarantee we're sitting in the middle of the perfect spot,
Look at the economy, and the economy in Orange County has gotten way more diverse. You have way bigger employers today than you did 20 years ago. You have, great schools, you have great weather, you have, great amenities, dining, all those things that would drive a very thriving market.
Yeah.
And you have this really limited supply of homes. That's the biggest factor, because in Orange County, there's very little bit of new construction. There's, I think, 30 new construction projects in all of Orange County. It's a population of 3 million people. There's just not enough new construction for the amount. All these projects are selling out like so quick. The properties get released and they sell out in minutes oftentimes. So if we look back for the last 80 years, 82 years, house values only have dropped 7 times in 80. 5 of those were from 2006 to 2012. But we had the most amount of inventory we've ever had in that time period. So we had too much supply, not enough demand, lending standards got tight, and we had a population dip in that time period. Today we have the opposite. We have population that's expanding. We have way less inventory. We do have this affordability challenge, but when that starts to improve, we'll see prices continue to expand. And I think there's a lot of data that supports that. And so I just think, if you're waiting, unfortunately, you're going to be waiting for something that I just don't think is going to become a reality, and it potentially could cost you, millions of dollars in the future.
Yeah. And then, like you said, the competition that you'll be up against at the time will be, you'll go crazy trying to deal with that again.
Yeah, there's no competition to refinance your loan. You just wait to try to get the lowest rate you can. The competition is buying the house. That's the hardest part.
For sure.
It's a popularity contest. Like, how do I make sure I get my offer accepted over everybody else?
Oh my gosh,
Dude, we got one accepted today, by the way. I had like the most heartfelt conversation with the agent. The agent's buying it with her daughter, and she was just so excited. There was multiple offers. She texted me this morning. She's like, Darren, this is amazing. I can't believe we got the house. And it's like, that's the best feeling ever.
I'm going to one right after this video right now that's similar. We'll see what happens, but it's a feel-good one. You know, and I hope it works out. We'll see what happens. But hey, seriously, thank you so much for doing this today. You're always so generous with your time, and I always love your insight, not just about work, but just about life in general, and I value that, and there's a ton of lenders, and you're not the only guy we work with, but Darren, you give of yourself to your community and to people, and you're always into personal development, and it's not just about loans, and that's what I've always respected and valued about you. So Thanks for taking your time today with us.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to acknowledge that it's a challenging time, right? These are tough decisions, it's emotional, and working with the right people that can support you through that process. Just shout out to Marcus for just being somebody that you can count on, that you can trust, that really knows the city and all the municipalities in a deep way. Like there's so much value in that. It's hard to understand, like, hey, what am I getting when I hire an agent? But like with somebody like Marcus, you get way more than you pay for. So yeah, just shout out to Marcus. Does an incredible job.